Well, hi there. I'm Diana Montford, the world's first transgender television journalist. Yes, I am. Born male, became female, and all that nice, interesting, weird stuff. Anyway, our history, the LGBTQ history. So much of it has been stolen from us, so much of it has been unreported. Let's talk about history, and let's talk about history and how we need to archive our history as we're making it. My guest is the archivist for the National LGBTQ Archives at the Center in New York City, Ms. Caitlin McCarthy. Hello.
Hello.
Come close.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And now let's talk about what is an archive?
That is a great place to start, actually. I usually like to start by comparing it to a library because we're all pretty familiar with libraries. With a library, you have a repository of published works, of books, music, movies, that kind of thing. An archive or an archives, either term is actually usable. So with an archives, you have a repository of unpublished works that can include records of any format. So it's not just paper, but it's also photographs, it's flyers, it's journals, it's posters, and these are records that were created in the daily life or activity of a person or an organization. So the way that you or I might take photos while we're on vacation, we're not taking the photo maybe specifically to take the photo and to have that object. We're taking it to document our vacation, right? So that's the key about archives. They're not a museum which collects artworks. They are collecting the kind of secondary materials that we all create in our lives.
Like your family photographs?
Yes.
Like political flyers you might get in the street for LGBTQ candidates, meetings you've attended that had a little brochure, LGBTQ meetings. This is the LGBTQ archive. It is history by the LGBTQ community for the LGBTQ community.
That is so important as well because the way that stories are told in books, in movies, in newspaper articles, these are being told from archival sources, from primary direct sources. And if a person wants to write a history of queer New York, if they don't have an archive like the archive at the center, like the Lesbian Her Story archives, other community-based archives, the person writing this book has to go to police records, they have to go to medical records, they have to go to these institutions that are by nature homophobic, sexist, transphobic, biphobic, right? To tell the stories, they have to read between the lines. And of course that's a noble effort, but to be able to tell our stories from our own lives and from our own perspectives, I think is so key.
And you might think that, well, okay, you're walking down the street and a gay politician hands you her or his brochure. And you think, don't throw it away, give it to the archives.
Yes, please give it to us.
Photographs from parties you gave in 1978, gay parties, give it to the archives. Videos you might have that are no longer on a format used like VHS or something, give it to the archives. They can transfer it to disk and whatever other technologies come down. What you think of as junk, posterity will think of as history. Just as today we look at all the things from, 1969, the Stonewall Rebellion and the early parades.
Right.
Things that were throwaways then that you got as you walked by and and you kept walking. That is history. Bring it to the archives. And if you're an older person and you're LGBTQ and you sense that maybe you won't be on this earth much longer, and whatever souvenirs you have, personal photographs, journals, diaries, give them to the archives. Because what you consider junk and trivial will be a mother lode to future historians.
Diana, you got it. I mean, that's actually probably the best part of my job, possibly, is being able to advocate to folks who maybe come to me for a much smaller reason. They'll say, oh, I have a memoir that I wrote. I never published it, but I thought maybe you'd want it. And I say to them, well, what else do you have? It turns out they have a run of calendars from 1980 to the present day, kept meticulously. They have photographs, they have correspondence with their friends and with the other activists they were working with, all of these sorts of things. And to be able to...
Excuse me, one of the great accounts we have of the Stonewall Rebellion is a letter that the author Edmund White wrote to some friends of his. The newspapers gave little stories, you know, Queen Bee's stinging mad.
Yes, the famous headline.
Yes, but the Edmund White letter, although written to be humorous, contains so much history that is not contained anywhere else. And that is how we know what happened more or less exactly that night. He would have thought, there, okay, I wrote the letter, now bye.
Right.
You know, no, save those letters.
Right. It's just a real pleasure to be able to tell somebody, no, your life has value, your records, whether you're famous or not. That's not our rubric, right? We're not here to place value according to fame or renown.
Or whatever.
It's
or notoriety.
Or notoriety. It's historical value.
Yes.
And to a community like ours that actually does thrive on everyday life, right? I mean, just the very act of living, very act of doing is something that is worth valuing. So,
well, for example, the previous archivist saved the letters of Liz
Eden.
Liz Eden. You've heard of the film Dog Day Afternoon? The beautician, that's Liz Eden. And Rich Wandel, the previous archivist, saved her letters to her lover, the man who robbed the bank, and those are now part of LGBTQ history.
That's right.
And who would think to save that? You would think, well, you know, how disgraceful, and you throw them away, but don't.
Yeah. Yeah, the story of loss is so immediate, it's so real. It's a big part of my work is thinking about what we've lost and what we don't have anymore. So I'm always trying to build up our idea of our own value, I think is the way I would put it.
Well, and we've been devalued for so long.
Exactly.
And told that anything about us is filthy and disgusting.
Exactly.
And if you have any decency at all, you'll burn that, you know?
And I'm sure that Rich has spoken about this to you and about the beginnings of the archive at the center, but you know, there was a real necessity for it. People were coming to the center in the 80s, in the late 80s, in the early 90s, while AIDS was ongoing.
And they were dying.
And they were dying, and they were leaving stuff behind. And they thought, well, the center, they're the place we go for a safe space, for community, for friendship, for fun. And they brought their records too. And the center had to think, you know, there is an actual mandate here to collect this, to preserve this. And that's how the archives was founded for the most part. It was out of that kind of loss and tragedy.
Why don't you talk to them for a second? Because something happened to the clock, and I need to see the timer so I know how long we're going. So ask for records and all that right in there.
Oh, sure.
And I will be, where are you? There, I'll be right back. Excuse me. Okay, talk.
Well, Diana's given me the opportunity to let folks know that we're very interested in your records, and this is not just individuals' records, right, like we're talking about photographs, correspondence, that kind of thing, but also the records of an organization, activist organization, arts organization, as long as there is an LGBTQ mission to the thing. We're very interested in it. We're on 13th Street, and we're here for you. So.
Excuse me.
You gave me my little pitch time.
Yes, and I hope it's been made clear how valuable what you might think is just throwaway stuff is. If you're house clean in the direction of the archives. And I might add, there is the Diana Montford collection at the archives with, well, a bunch of films episodes of this show.
Mm-hmm.
Old family photographs, new photographs, uh, things that I have from other people that have nothing to do with me, that I give to the center, like Sylvia Rivera obituaries,
Mm-hmm.
like Quentin Crisp obituaries, like all sorts of things,
Mm-hmm.
you know. If you have stuff that, even if it doesn't relate to you, give it to the archives,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
You're a champion.
Well, thanks. I have the soul of an archivist.
Ah.
But so now, how do you preserve all this stuff?
Oh, that's a good question.
Especially things like newspapers that are so fragile.
Mm-hmm. It does depend a lot on format. Some formats are going to be more fragile than others. One of our best methods is archival supplies, and we don't have to go too deep into it, but I'll tell you, an acid-free box, an acid-free folder, it's going to stop the deterioration
Even if it's
of those materials.
acid paper, like newspaper?
Mm-hmm. Yep, it cuts it off at the pass,
wonderful.
and it essentially it slows it down to the point that it's not deteriorating to our notice at that point. Electronic records are a whole other ballgame, though. And that is really important for us to get a handle on, because think about it, I mean, that's how we create records these days. Emails, photos on our phone, invitations that go out over
What's
the
going to
computer.
happen to those, since those cannot be preserved, you know?
In the same way, right? You can't put them in a box and put them in a climate-controlled room and just like, you know, you're done. Well, I will say that something that's counterintuitive is it's a lot more complicated to preserve an electronic record. That has to do with data loss, with the risk of the internet viruses coming through. It has to do with the way that
Also copyright.
Copyright absolutely is always very important. Access and files, even their format. So if a file no longer is in use, you can't open it anymore, right? So you have to always be updating and auditing, and it's all very, very nerdy, but it is necessary.
There's going to be a dearth of historical materials from this particular time because of what you've said.
And I hope that we all catch up to it sooner rather than later, because there's just no other option. I mean, there's no going back, right? So, so we're looking at that at the center. We're going to be doing this all next year, preparing for our digital preservation plan, and kind of strengthening that so that we can continue to collect in the same way that we've been collecting physical materials.
What do you do now? Surely these materials must accrue. What do? You can't keep them all on 13th Street, do you?
True. Like a lot of archives in New York, and this is small organizations like ours, but also the Metropolitan Museum of Art, it's NYU libraries, we store off-site. So we work with an off-site storage vendor, and I'm happy to say that ours currently does specialize in library and archives, so they get it.
Like in a salt mine or something.
Oh,
literally.
Something like that, actually.
To suck the moisture out of everything.
It's climate controlled, it's secure, against weather, against other kinds of
nuclear holocaust.
Cross your fingers.
Yeah, really.
And they have these lovely couriers we work with, and they bring us the boxes and the materials we need for our researchers every week. So
and
who
goes to the archives?
That's a great question. We have such a range of visitors. I'll use the term researchers, but often it's not what you would think of as traditional research. It's not necessarily a scholar or a published author working in the archives. Lately, it's been a lot of documentarians working on films or short videos. We have curators come through to make selections for exhibitions. We have students as young as high school or even middle school as visitors.
I was that kind of kid.
And we love that, because a lot of archives are closed to younger folks, but we are not. We want to get them in there as early as possible. We also host a number of artists, and we tend to do some wonderful collaborations with them. I have one artist named Chris Bernson who is inspired by our Richard Peckinpah beach photographs collection. This shows queer folks of all stripes hanging out at Reese Beach in the 1950s, performing in drag and walking around in couples and just hanging out. And he's been coming in and has been inspired in his photography work by these photographs, and he's actually doing a kind of work exchange.
Excuse me.
Of course.
Now, you have photographs dating back to the 19th century.
We do. Not so many that old, but there are some materials that are.
There's that famous woman photographer who was a lesbian who took all those pictures, including of transgendered sex workers.
Well, I mean, in the 19th century, to have photographs from that time is a special thing. I would say most of ours date from the 60s through to today.
Well, what I did when I gave you, this was before you went there, when I gave Rich I went to a photo shop and I had 19th century photographs reprinted. Excuse me. On archival quality paper.
Oh yes, you were thinking.
I'm gonna get a glass of water. Boy, this night is something. The timer, no. But no, I had them reprinted at a Photoshop on archival quality paper. The last 200 or 300 years, I was assured.
It's incredible.
So I mean, you know.
That is a way to preserve, you know, when the originals are no longer there with you.
Yeah, and 19th century photographs and very early 20th century photographs were not, they fade. That's what no one realizes.
Right.
They literally fade,
Right.
you know?
Right, yeah.
So anyway, what are you looking for? Like, what types of people are you looking for? As you've said, you don't have to be on television or be famous or notorious or be the subject of Dog Day Afternoon. Or
Yes, not all of us.
No,
can be
most of us
lucky.
are not like that.
Most of us are not, exactly. I'll say that one of our major goals is to take a look at the collections as they stand and to acknowledge and to address the gaps in the collection. So you mentioned Rich, who was the founder and the head archivist there for 27 years, and he did all of this as a volunteer. It was a labor of love. He didn't have the same level of resources that are required to really...
Well, they didn't really exist 27 years ago.
Exactly. So that's how we're preparing now for the future, and in terms of our collection development, what we want to do is really get more embedded in other areas of the community that are not very well represented in our collection.
Well, I turned you on to my friend Lucia Camerata.
Yes, absolutely.
Who's a lesbian, a butch lesbian, who's a filmmaker, photographer. You've seen her work on this show. And you told her that there is a dearth of lesbian herstory in the archives.
That's true. That group, I mean, essentially any LGBTQ group aside from
Rich old white men,
gay men, right?
Yes.
Gay cis men. So we're obviously still capturing those stories, those records, and they're incredibly important to the archive's history.
Well, Lucia's the only person who films the Dyke March every year.
Exactly. I mean, it was so wonderful to sit down with her, and we're just kind of getting it all on paper that, you know, these are our goals. We're going to put in the time. We're going to get ourselves out there in the community. Possibly, you know, begin to be more active in our collecting so that we can go to a smaller group, maybe activist group, or, you know, just as a kind of grassroots group and say, you're doing important work. You don't have the resources to address your records now, but we're here. So let's collaborate and see what we can do to help each other.
And if you're doing something today, give your current stuff to the archives, because 50 years from now, it will be priceless.
Absolutely. I mean, you got to think about the future, right? We talk about the past so much, but really we're here for future generations because they're going to need everything that we're doing today to be preserved so they can learn from it.
Exactly,
Yeah.
And so, do you accept donations of money?
We do. So we usually will speak with prospective donors and mention that, you know, it does take a lot of work to manage, to organize, to run the archives, right? Even just the archival supplies I mentioned to you, you wouldn't believe how expensive they are.
Right,
so we always encourage folks to donate if they can. We say usually $50 per box of materials is an industry standard. in the archives field. And then we accept donations by credit card, cash, check. You know, we're there.
And do you allow volunteers to work
We do.
there?
I'm so glad you brought it up because my team of volunteers is the reason anything is happening at the archives. I have to give so much credit to them. A number of them I inherited from Rich, who was amazing at assembling a team. And I've also recruited some since I've started at the center. And they come from all different backgrounds, different disciplines. In fact, not a one of them is a trained archivist or librarian, but they all have a passion for the community, for history, and they're committed to what we're doing and want to give back.
And also you can advise them as to how to archive something to preserve it, so you know it won't break or tear or whatever.
And they're there working with me weekly. I mean, we have people that are coming in weekly, 4 hours at a time. I mean, that's a good chunk of time for.
Yes.
It's uncompensated,
I
right?
know.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate them, and they're very important to what we do. I'm the only staff member, right? So to have volunteers to assist in this work and to support this work is so special.
If people come and they want to look through things, do they wear white gloves, or do you hand them gloves so they won't get?
They are offered blue gloves. In fact, I believe it's a non-latex material because of latex allergy. Maybe nitrile, I think, is the material.
Yeah.
Anyway, they're blue, so they're not quite as sexy as the white cotton gloves, but they are usually asked to wear gloves if they're handling, say, photographic prints that are not in enclosures, or I'll offer them for if somebody's working with newspapers, more to protect their hands than anything, because they'll get the ink.
No, you don't accept donations of clothing or anything, like this is what so-and-so wore at the Stonewall Rebellion.
It depends. We have a quite extensive collection of T-shirts, and these are T-shirts that are emblazoned with all kinds of different LGBTQ purposes and taglines. And
if Sylvia Rivera had given you her girdle, would you take it?
That is a very good question. You know, it would belong. It would belong with us in spirit, but we wouldn't be able to care for it quite as well as, say, you know, the Smithsonian Museum or something.
But they wouldn't take
or
her
FIT
stuff.
Or yes, I know. So it's a conundrum.
And she was a
right?
street person, so this would not be La Perla.
Yeah.
This would be junky.
Right.
She bought it for
Right.
2 cents on 14th Street.
So it's a good framing, and in a case like that where, you know, we're not a fashion archives, we're not a clothing archive, so we're not perfectly set up for it. But you know what? Preserving it is everything, right? And if it's going to be lost, we take it.
Yeah. And I guess you figure out what to do with it eventually, you know?
Yeah.
When we were at the Stonewall 50 celebration recently in June, they weren't from your archive, but there were things like old evening gowns and old feather boas and everything, which to the naked eye, frankly, looked like old junk.
Right.
But it was because of the person who had worn it
Right.
and the context in which it had been worn that these things mattered.
Right. This was the show at New York Historical Society, right? And I believe they borrowed from all over the city, including from our archives. We had some material that we loaned to them, and that's another way that we kind of get our name out there, is we lend material or collaborate on exhibitions, and that's been really, really fabulous for me, is to just kind of strengthen that network of kind of queer organizations throughout the city, because, you know, we're all here, we're working hard, we're working on limited bandwidth, of course, running on steam, but if we can kind of come together and complement each other, that's always the best.
How can people contact you if they have materials they want to donate to?
Oh, that's easy. You can just email archive@gaycenter.org, ARCHIVE, no S, @gaycenter.org. And you can also call the center, but I forgot the number.
Well, it's the center. I don't know it offhand either.
I forgot the main number.
But it is, you just call and a recorded voice comes on, just push 0 for operator and say, I'd like the archives, please.
There it is.
And they will connect you, and you will hear another voicemail,
Mm-hmm.
and you will leave your message that, hello, I'm 89, I think I'm dying, but I have all these materials from the 50s and 60s about our community. Would you like these? By the way, I live in Far Rockaway. Do you go get them if they do?
Yeah, I prefer to do a visit before we agree because, of course, we can't take everything in the world. We have to make sure it fits within our
Will
collecting
you pick it up
scope.
if someone is infirm and cannot?
Absolutely, yeah. If they're in the city, right? If they're reachable, yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
so now, so do you go or does the volunteer go?
Usually I will go with a volunteer.
To judge if it's worthy of the archive.
To meet with the donor, to not so much worthy, but just to make sure that it falls within our collecting scope, which is essentially very wide open. It's any material created by and or for LGBTQ New Yorkers.
Mm-hmm.
We can't collect porn, but that's only for space concerns. There's too much of it.
Yes.
So we send them to Cornell. They have a human sexuality collection.
Oh, does it really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God.
Yes. So that's our scope. So
I thought I was unshockable. I'm not unshockable. Cornell collects gay porn.
Cornell sure does, yeah.
Think of the fun the Archivist has at that
I
job.
know.
Yeah.
How about it?
He pays them, I hear. But, okay, well, now you know, just contact the LGBTQ Center here in New York.
Yeah.
And whatever you have is valuable because it's LGBTQ. My guest has been the archivist at the National LGBTQ Archives at the Center here in New York, Ms. Caitlin McCarthy. She is an avid collector and archivist, and your things are safe with her. If you're concerned, really, truly, your things are very safe with her and the archives at the Center. So you don't have to worry. They're not going to say thank you and then throw them in the garbage. You're not, are you? No.
Absolutely not.
No. So, and you sign a paper saying that if they don't want them, they give them back to you anyway. So, you know.
Yeah, you know the drill.
Yeah, I know the drill. Anyway, I'm Diana Montford, who knows the drill. And I just thought of the dentist. Anyway, I know the drill. I love you, even if no one else loves you, and even if you have nothing archival, I love you. See you next time. Well, bye.